Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the ongoing US-Israeli strikes on Iran that have already killed the Supreme Leader, the head of the IRGC, and members of Khamenei's family, but not the powerful and despised son Moshtaba. While there were celebrations in Tehran, much of the country is in mourning, leading to questions about regime change since, while air power alone provides gratification without commitment, it is not clear what kind of government will be left to make a deal with Trump. However, if Venezuela is the model, after getting rid of the top guy, but leaving the torturer Cabello in charge of the Interior Ministry, then we can expect the IRGC to stay in power in Iran. Joining us is Nader Hashemi, the director of the Alawi Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding and an associate professor of Middle East and Islamic politics at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. A non-resident fellow at Democracy for the Arab World Now, he's the author of The People Reloaded, The Green Movement and the Struggle for Iran's Future, and Sectarianization, Mapping the New Politics of the Middle East. Then, with Trump's war on Iran a distraction from the Epstein scandal, we'll look into the leak by the DOJ to The Guardian and Breitbart of the missing files Pam Bondi held back of FBI reports containing accusations by a then 13-year-old girl that Trump raped her, which cast doubt on the victim's credibility. Joining us is Nina Burleigh, a senior editor at The New Republic, best-selling author, documentary producer, and publisher of the Substack American Freak Show. A professor at New York University's Arthur J. Carter Journalism Institute, she has written 7 books, the latest of which include Golden Handcuffs, The Secret History of Trump's Women, and she has a new novel, Zero Visibility Possible. The producer of the recent documentary series on Apple TV, Epstein's Shadow, she has an article at American Freak Show, Where Are the FBI's Missing Interviews with the Woman Who Named Trump? Then finally, with right-wing Trump-friendly billionaires buying up the mainstream media following the authoritarian playbook of Putin and Orban, we will speak with Jessica Gonzlez, the co-CEO of Free Press, and a public policy lawyer and activist at the intersection of racial justice, media, technology, and democracy. She was a staff attorney and teaching fellow at Georgetown Law's Institute for Public Representation, where she represented public interest and civil rights groups before the FCC and the Courts of Appeal. And she has testified before Congress on multiple occasions to support net neutrality. And before we begin at the start of this new year, which will culminate in the fateful midterm elections in November, polls already indicate MAGA Republicans will lose the House and possibly the Senate. But we're up against a Trump-Miller presidency already drunk with power, and they will do anything to stay in power, having already demonstrated their contempt for the United States Constitution with Trump's January 6, 2001 coup attempt. They see over half of the country as their enemy and have a private army of loyal thugs ready to round up critics of the regime they label as communist lunatics. As Trump cowers, the media and his cronies buy up the mainstream press, Background Briefing will continue to expose this malevolent regime's fascistic machinations, providing a daily insight into the news as a massive coalition of people power is mobilized to bring about an end to this nightmare and usher in a new era of reform not seen since Nixon departed the presidency in disgrace. To help save America's 250-year-old democracy, we need all hands on deck, and you can make a tax-deductible donation to help us do our part at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org. And thank you. And joining us now, Nader Hashemi, who's the director of the Alawi Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding and a professor of Middle East and Islamic politics at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, a non-resident fellow at Democracy for the Arab World Now. He's the author of The People Reloaded, The Green Movement and the Struggle for Iran's Future, and Sectarianization, Mapping the New Politics of the Middle East. Welcome to Background Briefing, Nader Hashemi.
Thanks, Ian, for the invite.
Well, thanks for joining us. And at this point, we know in terms of the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran that the Supreme Leader has been killed, the head of the IRGC has been killed. along with members of Khamenei's family. I don't believe that Moshtaba, the despised and powerful son, has been killed, has he? And Ahmadinejad, the former president, has been killed. But what about not Moshtaba? Any reports on that?
No, there's no reports on that. I think it would have been reported by now. In many ways, he's um, the Rasputin behind the throne, so to speak, to draw on a Russian analogy, very much a key player in Iran's power structure. But as far as I've heard, he's still alive.
So, how much, though, is this? I mean, first of all, Trump is not a serious person. I mean, it's a catastrophe to have this man president of the United States, not once but twice. And he's clearly a reality TV guy who only thinks about the news cycle and getting a bump. And I just don't know how you can, with air power alone, and air power, of course, provides gratification without commitment, how you can bring about regime change if the model that Trump is going to follow is what he did in Venezuela. Then it's pretty pathetic because he got rid of the top guy but kept, for example, the torturer Cabello in power, who's still in charge of the Ministry of Interior, which would indicate that he could make a deal with the IRGC and they would be still in power. In fact, he sort of said that in his True Social post that, we know that you if you don't make a deal with us now, we'll kill you. So this is kind of mafia stuff, but that's how Trump rolls.
Absolutely. It's totally out of the mafia playbook, which is, I think, an accurate characterization of Donald Trump. And I think you're also right, Ian, to point to the example of Venezuela. I think Trump got a big ego boost that he was able to pull off the capture of Maduro relatively easily without paying a price. He was able to do what he loves to do, global grandstanding, projection of power. And I think he was led to believe that he could do something similar in Iran. The difference is that Iran is a much tougher nut to crack, so to speak. In other words, the nature of its authoritarian regime is very different than it is in Venezuela and that it is in other parts of the world. So simply removing the the man at the top of the power structure, as he did yesterday, doesn't change the underlying reality where a deeply entrenched authoritarian regime is still very much in power. And of course, the tragedy is that when this is all over, I suspect the regime will probably be strengthened and the people of Iran will be weaker. The report that I just got a moment ago, Ian, before we started speaking, is that Trump has now reached out and is in favor of negotiations with Iran. So that sort of tells you about his, so-called moral commitment to help the beleaguered people of Iran.
Well, there's a prediction market called Polymarkets, where Don Jr. is on the advisory board of Polymarkets, and insiders have made at least 1.5 million betting on a war with Iran. So again, these are not serious people; these are grifters
No, I agree.
and
I agree.
of the worst kind.
Have you seen these clips, Ian? I mean, they're worth checking out. Someone has put them together. But prior to him running as a candidate, there's all these video clips where he's going around mocking President Obama, saying Obama wants to start a war with Iran for no good reason. This is going to be a complete catastrophe. I mean, we know this about Donald Trump. As you said, he's a showman. There's no real serious understanding of international relations or even of, U.S. foreign policy interests. It's very much about his own ego, critically his own business interests. And that's what's so dangerous about this moment is that he's the most powerful man in the world, in control of the most powerful military in the world. And he can easily be manipulated by these political forces that are both domestic and foreign and can wreak this type of havoc and chaos that we're seeing before us.
Well, the most powerful military in the world also obviously made a terrible mistake by killing up to 150 schoolgirls in a school in the south of Iran, which happens to be next door to a IRGC barracks.
Agreed. I mean, we don't know who. I'm not sure if that was an American missile or if that was an
Israel,
American,
well,
Israeli or American.
yeah, the Israelis say it wasn't there, so we'll see.
Yeah, I agree. So this is just, I mean, we're going to get the casualty toll later on, but it's tough to sort of square this idea of the liberation of the people of Iran with, this type of bombing campaign, which inevitably is going to hurt innocent people. So I'm very worried about what it's going to look like in Iran when all is said and done. I suspect it's going to look very similar to what happened last June, where you had a lot of people killed, many of them senior Iranian regime officials, but you also had a lot of innocent people who were killed as well. And so that's just compounds the tragedy that we're looking at right now.
So what do you think is going on? Because we've seen video of people celebrating on the rooftops in Tehran, but that is probably the educated, the young, the women who hate this regime. But there's also a huge number of the population in mourning. And I just don't know what the figures are. I mean, how many people in that country are celebrating the death of the supreme leader, and how many are not? Do we have any idea? In other words, how ripe is that country for regime change?
The answer, Ian, is that no one really knows. What we can say with accuracy is that Iran, like any society, is not a monolith. I think there is a strong desire for a regime change, political change, structural change after 47 years of effectively, one party rule, or if you want, one person rule. We saw that recently in the protests in Iran that erupted in late December and early January. Those protests were characterized by a key feature that they were really broad-based and representative. It wasn't one constituency, it wasn't an ethnic group or a religious group or young people or women. It was really everyone. So, and that's why I think the regime cracked down so brutally and violently on January 8th and 9th when it committed that horrific massacre that killed thousands of people, because it knew that power seemed to be slipping. So there's certainly a desire for regime change. And as you pointed out, especially young people who are deeply disillusioned ideologically from this regime, don't buy into its narrative. But at the same time, as we're seeing today, the regime does have a very loyal base of support. I think it's a small minority, but it's deeply loyal, both religiously and also politically, in the sense that in every authoritarian regime, there are people who support it, not because they buy into the ideological narrative necessarily of the ruling regime, but because their livelihoods, their wealth, and their power is connected to the political status quo. So I think both of these trends are there. And there's also, I think, a third constituency of just average Iranians who probably don't like the status quo, want change, but they're not willing to see their country destroyed. And their primary focus of this third group in contemporary Iran is just trying to survive. The economy has collapsed. People can't put food on the table. Just to tell you one personal anecdote, in recent, weeks, I'm getting messages from family members, can you spare me a little bit of money because I can't put food on the table? So that's a key feature of Iran today, mass economic suffering, pauperization, and poverty, which is a function both of the regime's corruption and incompetence, but also critically, these crippling sanctions that Donald Trump has imposed on Iran that has produced this type of mass suffering. So that's how I read, what Iranians think and want today.
So, do you think the American people, and I mean, here I'm in Los Angeles, otherwise known as Tehrangeles, and a lot of demonstrations, and I understand and I sympathize with the demonstrators. This is a horrible, horrible regime. But from the American perspective, how can you get the American people to understand what this regime is like? The best example would be the TV series The Handmaid's Tale, right? In other words, this would be like if the Christian nationalist far right, evangelicals took over this country. And even if that were the case, it's still an inadequate analogy because the supreme leader is such a brutal guy. I mean, Trump said he killed 32,000. I don't know how many they killed, but they clearly, he says he's God's representative on earth, right? He talks to God. So how do you deal with that? And can you give our audience a sense of what a theocracy is like and living under a theocracy, which I find to be even more frightening in many ways than a dictatorship, which of course it is. It's both a dictatorship and a theocracy.
Well, it's really nasty, especially if you're a woman if you're a minority, particularly if you're from the Baha'i religious minority, or if you happen to come from an ethnic group. So it's, ideologically, it's a totalitarian regime. It has elements of totalitarianism baked into the system. It's authoritarian, and then it also has these quasi, democratic features that once sort of provided for some choice between carefully screened regime approved candidates that could draw people out, and allow them to sort of exercise limited choice over who their rulers could be. So it's a brutal regime. When you ask, how can we convince the average American person about the nature of the brutality of this regime, Ian, I think most people have very few illusions about the brutality of the Islamic Republic. I don't know of anyone who looks up to it or sort of admires it in terms of its control over Iranian society. Um, One just has to read what I do to understand what's going on in any society from a human rights perspective, as I stick very closely to the credible, respected human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, etc. And I look at what they have to say on an annual basis, and it paints quite a horrific picture. I think it's accurate to say that if you compare Iran's human rights record to those of the other countries in the region, Iran probably has the worst human rights record. And that's saying a lot because we're talking about a region where, human rights are not respected. And there's a lot of brutal authoritarian regimes, many of them that we in the West support. But Iran, is distinguished by just one fact. If you want one picture that sticks in my mind, if one wants to understand the nature of the Islamic Republic, it ranks number one in the world in terms of state-sanctioned executions. In 2025, Iran executed at least 1,500 people. That's number one in the world. They say China is bigger, but they don't release figures. So that's the nature of the regime. Ian, I think the bigger question is not how do we get Americans to understand the nature of the Islamic Republic and what it's like to live under a theocracy is, I think the bigger and more important question that is very relevant now, given what's happening, is how can we get the American people to support a more carefully calibrated U.S. foreign policy that can actually help the people of Iran exercise their right to self-determination and overthrow this theocracy. Unfortunately, U.S. foreign policy toward Iran has been guided and shaped primarily by one single issue that all of your listeners will know, and that is the question of Iran's nuclear program, nothing else. If it's another issue, it's Iran's regional intervention. There never has been a serious U.S. foreign policy, at least in my lifetime, that is geared toward helping the Iranian people, creating better conditions where they can organize themselves to challenge this authoritarian regime. I think that's the big question, and that's the big challenge. And I'm hoping if we ever get out of this authoritarian moment in the United States, in other words, we get to a post-Trump world, post-Trump America, and there's still something that looks like a democracy that's left over, that more responsible members of the Democratic Party can actually take this issue on in a much more serious way, because business as usual with respect to U.S. foreign policy is not helping the Iranian people. It's
Sure.
actually impoverishing them.
Yes, but unfortunately, Trump's going to make a dirty deal. He doesn't care about the Iranian people. He'll make a deal with the devil, just
Totally agree.
just to look good and get his Nobel Prize and one up Obama. That's all he cares about. And meanwhile, there's 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, which is close to bomb. Doesn't take that long with enough centrifuges to get it up to weapons grade. So that remains out there. So this is all, we have to remember, this is all about distracting us from the Epstein scandal. This is all about the MO of this dreadful man and his cacistocracy of clown car cabinet. It's just an appalling situation. And again, this is not a serious person, but wars are very serious things.
Oh, I agree. And this is the tragedy of this moment, as I just want to emphasize this point. While this is very much about Iran, the Middle East, what's happening, it's also really about the United States of America and our broken democracy, because Trump has 3 years left and he could get reelected, or someone like him could come to power. And the sad reality is, for better or for worse, the United States still remains the most influential player in the international system. And if you have a character like Donald Trump, who's really a clown, cartoonish character, running the ship of state, the chaos that he can produce, and we're seeing it right now in terms of, the international system with all of this insanity in Greenland and from Greenland to Gaza to Venezuela to Cuba to Iran and who knows where else. There are huge consequences. So this is also another reason for people to really get off their chairs and to organize and mobilize and try and fight for what's left of our democracy, because the consequences are huge, not just for Americans, obviously, but for our planet.
Well, Nader Hashemi, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thanks, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Nader Hashemi. He's the director of the Alawite Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding and an associate professor of Middle East and Islamic politics at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, a non-resident fellow at Democracy for the Arab World Now. He's the author of The People Reloaded, The Green Movement of the Struggle for Iran's Future, and Sectarianization, Mapping the New Politics of the Middle East. We're going to take a brief station break, and with Trump's war in Iran a distraction from the Epstein scandal, we'll look into the leak by the DOJ to The Guardian and Breitbart that cast doubt on the credibility of the then 13-year-old girl who claimed Trump raped her.
The Eastern world, it is exploding, violence flaring, bullets loading. You're old enough to kill, but not for voting. You don't believe in war, but what's that gun you're toting? And even the Jordan River has bodies floating. But you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, Nina Burleigh, a senior editor at the New Republic, a best-selling author, documentary producer, and publisher of the Substack American Freak Show, a professor at New York University's Arthur J. Carter Journalism Institute. She's written 7 books, the latest of which include Golden Handcuffs, The Secret History of Trump's Women, and she has a new novel, Zero Visibly Possible, and she's the producer of a recent documentary series on Apple TV, Epstein's Shadow, and she has an article at American Freak Show, Where Are the FBI's Missing Interviews with a Woman Who Named Trump? Welcome to Background Briefing, Nina Burleigh.
Thank you for having me, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us, Nina. And the 4 interviews that were recorded by the FBI on their 302 forms, field reports. What you have mentioned in your article is that they put in caps on these reports, protect source, which is a way of saying this person could well be in danger and we've got to keep her confidentiality secret. Is that your understanding? Because there were 4 interviews, obviously, with this accuser of Trump, who said he raped her when she was 13 years old. One on July the 24th of 2019, one on the 7th of August, the 22nd of August, and the 16th of October of 2019, all apparently in Washington state. So let's start with the protect source. What does that flag for you, Nina?
Well, it's it's a big red flag, actually, because we've been going through these files for months now. And, there is ample information that the FBI talked to different redacted victims, right? Redacted means they were victims. And we have yet to see the, in capital letters, protect source label after one of those redacted names. So that's a big red flag. I talked to an ex-FBI agent who worked with mafia cases in the U.S., in New York and New Jersey. And he said, well, that's what they use when the source is a mafia rat. So, it's taken pretty seriously. They don't just put that on any source, any interview any person they talk to.
So what do you make of the reporting in The Guardian, which indicates that the reporters actually have seen these documents? At least that's the way I read their report.
Right.
it casts doubts on, certainly on whether, if this accuser and victim were ever to testify publicly, she may not be the most credible witness. What do you make of the
Right. Well, I couched my article in the I start off by saying, look, the FBI fields a lot of allegations, accusations, and stories from a lot of different people, and you can see some of that, the sort of illegitimate or crazy stuff already coming up, and you can see Pizzagate, kind of surging back into these DIY investigations. You see it on Substack, you see it on Twitter conversations, Reddit conversations, where you have, somebody alleged that Trump had someone murdered and impregnated someone and threw a baby off a yacht in like Michigan, just wacko stuff that that there's, these people may have had terrible abuses in their childhood that, turns them into, they're not credible. So I read these things with that in mind. I do not want to be a participant in, resurging satanic panic Pizzagate stuff. So I couched it with that as a preamble. And I said, the fact that they removed 3 of 4 of these interviews, and the fact that they flagged in 2025 on some kind of a report that they were giving to the Justice Department on the powerful or well-known men who were involved in these files, and they put Trump at the top of the list, of a list that they had actually highlighted the top 5 or 6 names as the ones with salacious, quote, that's an FBI quote, salacious allegations, and that then we can connect those salacious allegations apparently refer to these interviews. Those 2 things, protect source, the fact that they flagged it and that they then removed 3 of 4 of them, gives credence to the notion that something about it caused enormous panic in the DOJ, and that they reacted by quickly and sloppily renumbering their system around these files, so that you really had to look closely to figure out that they had an original numbering system, that they had erased 3 of them. 3 of the numbers aren't in there, and those 3 numbers apparently correspond to like 50 or 60 pages of interviews with this person. So that's all to say, they obviously they didn't want the public to see this. And yet, they released a little bit of it, possibly through incompetence and panicky, releasing of these files. And so, my take on it is, and you see this in the story, that here's what the evidence shows. Here's what we see in the files. They raise significant questions about allegations that were made about Trump, true or false, that alarmed the DOJ enough that they removed parts of it. And that simply says Congress people like Nancy Mace, because this woman is the allegations are from somebody who was in South Carolina. That Nancy Mace and these Congress people who can look at the files unredacted should be asking the DOJ to give them all the material, and that's it. Just have a look at it, and let the chips fall where they may. Let people decide for themselves, since we're dumping all this on the public instead of secreting some away. Now, you asked about The Guardian. What happened was, the Guardian article is written by an independent journalist named Jacqueline Sweet. She's pretty good at what she does. We knew when we published our article, we knew then that she was very skeptical of these things. And she kept texting my research assistant and saying, you're on the wrong path. This is not true. This is a fraud. These are lurid allegations. It's not right. There's something wrong. It smells. And okay, so she was already banging that drum for several days before then the Guardian piece comes out. And what we know is that somebody handed the 3 interviews or what are said to be the 3 interviews, to Jacqueline Sweet, who published it in the Guardian, and to Breitbart, which is, as you know, the Bannon extremist fringe right-wing quote unquote news site. Okay, so those are the two places that these pieces of information were smuggled over to, and they raise legitimate questions. What really raises the legitimate question, though, is where Jacqueline Sweet goes on in that article to say, well, this woman was also, she has some kind of had criminal allegations, never officially convicted of anything, but some allegations involving repeated frauds. And so, she casts doubt on the woman's veracity without, again, putting out the records, if there are any, of these fraudulent activities that she was engaged in as an adult. Okay. So I'm not the believe all woman person. I don't believe, I think the Charlottesville rape thing with Rolling Stone that brought down my friend Will Dana and cast mud on that, or threw mud on that, the reputation of that magazine forever. There are people out there who will make stories up, and that's a problem. But when it's a problem when you're dumping, unfiltered material on the public, and the public then has to do this DIY research, or journalists like us do so I don't want to say that that the Jacqueline Sweet Guardian piece and the Breitbart piece are some part of some kind of op, but it is suspicious that they're not releasing this material to everyone, including the Congress people who are asking for them now, because this story, when we published it, and others did, we published the missing files information, and it has got into mainstream media. You can see the track of it getting from us into NPR, from NPR into the New York Times, into MS Now, into CNN, and the mainstream is now the attention has been the Congressman, Senator Whitehouse is paying attention. That why don't they just hand everything off to Congress and then put it into the files and let everybody make up their own minds? Now, the allegations themselves are disgusting and lurid, and my take on Trump. I mean, again, I've been covering Trump, as you know, since 2015. I knew of him back in the day in New York when we were just using him as a quote machine for People magazine because he said funny things. And now, years later, and I wrote a book about the Trump women and his relationship to women. Okay. And I'm not quite sure that I buy that the silver bullet that's going to take Trump down is a pedophilic act. I just don't know if that's in his game, part of his game. Now, of course, this happens in the 80s. The different man then. He was absolutely palled up with Epstein in the 90s. You can see him with teen girls, and we know from the Teen USA pageant contestants that he was a sex pest. And there's no doubt about him being a sex pest with teenagers at those pageants.
Right, but by the way, Nina, the BBC's Panorama, their flagship news show, like 60 Minutes,
it's a great
the title of their expose is "Trump the Sex Pest."
It's a terrific documentary, and it has photographs from, and I think even an interview with a source of mine for the Trump Women book, who was around in those Look of the Year modeling contest, quote unquote modeling contest that Trump ran, and invited all of his oafish commercial real estate buddies to come and ogle and paw these girls at the Plaza Hotel, and that's part of that documentary. Those images are disgusting, and
right.
You can still see
and
them
it will not be broadcast here in the United States, but particularly on CBS, right?
No, not on CBS. You can forget that.
Right. So, is this then a case that Pam Bondi's DOJ and Kash Patel's FBI decided to leak these files that the Department of Justice held back, and that the reporter Roger Sullenberg uncovered that mendacity? Is the fact that they chose this woman at The Guardian and Breitbart as a conduit, that raises suspicions, right? That nobody else, in other words, they didn't give it to the Democrats. They didn't give it to anybody but
They didn't give it to the Democrats. They didn't give it to the New York Times. Maybe they didn't give it to the New York Times because they thought it wouldn't stand up to that kind of more rigorous fact checking. Although I will say the Guardian's investigative team is terrific. Now, Jacqueline Sweet is not a staff member of the Guardian. She's freelance like I am. And she brought that to them. But I don't think the Guardian, well, I don't know what kind of rigorous fact checking they did about these allegations regarding the fraud. But it's interesting that it's only been released to Breitbart and to this other reporter. And why not just dump it on everybody? Why not let all reporters at it? I think that maybe it's because the allegations are so lurid that they don't want more attention paid to them. Whether true or not, they're going to come out and they're going to look. It looks bad for him. It's not something that they want out there. But again, he has. You have Stormy Daniels. You have Eugene Carroll. I mean, the guy is absolutely a predator. And the problem with this is predatory behavior is baked into the MAGA assessment of him. They absolutely don't care.
Right. And Stormy Daniels, of course, was threatened by a mafia goon or somebody that sounded like a mafia goon. And this person, who's not named in the Guardian story, I think on a third interview, which a lawyer did not attend, and nor was it taped, she expressed concern about mentioning Trump. Because
yes, you have that little bit off, but yeah, you're right. The lawyer is the one who told them in this interview. The lawyer told the FBI that she was concerned because of I think the word was like a suspicious workplace incident. And as soon as I saw that, I thought of the Stormy Daniels story of what you're referring to, where she was in a parking lot in Las Vegas. It was sunset. She had a baby daughter in the car seat in the back, and some thuggish dude approached her. It was when she was about to write the story or somebody's published a story about her relationship with Trump. And he said, would be really something, sad if something happened to your cute little baby back there or something. I mean, overt threat. Right. And immediately I thought of that incident.
So is the person that we're talking about the same person that was originally called Jane Doe 4, Katie Johnson? I don't think. No, this is not Katie Johnson. This person is not Katie Johnson. I don't think this person is a woman from South Carolina, Hilton Head. Her mother was a real estate agent. I think she's identified. I think some people know who she is now. I think that Sweet and the Breitbart folks know. They've released enough of that you can figure it out. The mother was a real estate agent in Hilton Head as Hilton Head was becoming popular, kind of hangout for like ex-CIA agents. Of course, that's Epstein's milieu, and financiers from New York City were down there. Jimmy Kane, who was, I think, connected to Bear Stearns somehow, was running and so was what's his name? The British moneybags. Oh God, gold, whatever. Anyway, yes, Goldsmith. Those people were hanging out in Hilton Head in the 80s. So for Mark Epstein, the brother Mark Epstein, to tell Jacqueline Sweet, the Guardian, I don't know of my brother ever having been to Hilton Head in the 80s. That is, Mark Epstein might not know that he was there, but it certainly was happy hunting grounds for Epstein's type of people. I mean, Clinton was running Renaissance Week, going to Renaissance weekends there. I actually went down there and covered a Clinton event in the late 80s. No, probably in the 90s, not 80s. But in the 80s, it already was becoming this kind of a hang for his type of people. And the real estate agent was advertising these vacation rentals with a babysitter if needed. And the babysitter was her 13-year-old daughter. And that's how Epstein, of course, has no kids, lures the babysitter / 13-year-old to his house, drugs and rapes. Right. And then he shipped her to New York, apparently.
According to her, then she started coming back with other girlfriends, which is the MO, right? And then somehow gets on a plane with him and ends up in New Jersey or New York. And that's where this encounter with with Trump happens.
Says that Epstein introduced her to Trump, who subsequently forced her head down to his exposed penis, which is subsequently bit. In response, Trump punched her in the head and kicked her out. That's what we know. That's bad enough. The idea that a president of the United States could even be accused of something like that indicates.
Right, exactly.
Well, let's stay in touch then and follow this, because, I agree with you that it's not the silver bullet to get rid of him, but it just adds to this incredible list of this man who's been one step ahead of the sheriff all of his life and is a veritable Houdini when it comes to getting out of trouble. But something has to bring him down. The weight of everything that this man has done in his sordid life is such that eventually it has to catch up on him. I'm talking about the laws of physics here. What do you think, just in closing?
Well, I mean, the laws of mortality, right? At some point, he won't be around, and we will have books written about this Epstein stuff for decades to come. That's for sure. There's so much material here that it reveals things about geopolitics and everything that Epstein was netted up with, and not just the sex pest stuff and the abuse and rape and so on, but the international. Israel-connected international activities, which, by the way, we are right now living through. And today, I honestly think this is one of the most spectacular distractions from a panicked White House that you've ever seen. I mean, I think they don't want the Epstein files to be front and center. And with Dubai taking bomb hits from Iran and the Strait of Hormuz supposedly closing, I think that they won't be, Epstein stuff will be second. We've just discovered something today about Lutnick that should be on the front pages of every newspaper. And I don't know, I'm going to publish it later today. I don't know if this kind of thing is even going to be breaking through the surface at the moment.
Wagging the dog in front of us. I thank you for joining us, Nina.
Anytime, you're welcome.
And again, I've been speaking with Nina Burleigh, is the senior editor of the New Republic, best-selling author, documentary producer, and publisher of the Substack American Freak Show, a professor at New York University's Arthur J. Carter Journalism Institute. She's written 7 books, the latest of which include Golden Handcuffs, The Secret History of Trump's Women, and she has a new novel, Zero Visibility Possible, and is the producer of the recent documentary series on Apple TV, Epstein's Shadow. And she has an article at American Freak Show, Where Are the FBI's Missing Interviews with the Woman Who Named Trump? We're going to take a brief station break and back looking into how right-wing Trump-friendly billionaires are buying up the mainstream media following the authoritarian playbook of Putin and Orban. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Jessica Gonzalez, who is the co-CEO of Free Press and the public policy lawyer and activist at the intersection of racial justice, media, technology, and democracy. She was a staff attorney and a teaching fellow at Georgetown Law's Institute for Public Representation, where she represented public interest and civil rights groups before the FCC and the courts have appealed, and she has testified before Congress on multiple occasions to support net neutrality. Welcome to Background Briefing, Jessica Gonzalez.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And are we to conclude, Jessica, that right-wing billionaires they are buying the truth in effect? I mean, this is a model that Orban, actually can go back to Putin in his takeover of the media in Russia, but it has echoes of both Putin and in particular Orban. And it would seem to me that we're close. I don't know how close we are to the point of no return, where right-wing billionaires essentially will control the minds of America.
That's exactly what we're concerned about. This is right out of the authoritarian playbook. You saw it happen in Hungary. You saw it, as you mentioned, you saw it happen in Russia, many other places where right-wing oligarchs who are aligned with authoritarian leaders, buy up media and silence dissent. And in this case, we see Paramount, which already merged last year with Skydance, now trying to buy Warner Brothers, which had already merged with Discovery previously. This media merger is enormous, and it includes not only the companies I just named, but also CNN, HBO, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, CBS, which has already seen massive censorship from the Ellison family since they took it over last year, as well as TikTok. And you have to wonder what's next. This is just the beginning of the floodgates opening for the consolidation of the media into oligarchs who will censor the truth.
So let's add up the influence of right-wing billionaires over U.S. media. Elon Musk, the richest man in America, right? He's got X, formerly Twitter, and that's influential, clearly. Then you've got the Ellisons, whose father now owns TikTok, which is extremely influential amongst young Americans. Now they've got CBS, and now they've won the bid to get Warner Brothers, which involves the assets that you just mentioned. Then you've got the Murdoch family controlling a lot of the media. You've got Jeff Bezos, another right-wing billionaire. You've got the Smith family, who controls Sinclair, and you've got Nexstar as well. Together they control most of local TV stations where most Americans get their news. So they've already got a pretty solid lockup on the media, don't they, MAGA?
They absolutely do. And let's talk about Nexstar for a minute, because Nexstar has a huge merger pending before the FCC. And most people have never even heard the name Nexstar. Well, they're the largest broadcaster in the United States, and they're right now attempting to acquire Tegna, the fourth largest broadcaster. You know, last year when there was a big fuss over the FCC's attempt to censor Jimmy Kimmel, Nexstar was the very first broadcaster to pull his program off the air when FCC Chairman Brendan Carr said they ought to. And so this is a really dangerous setup. But I will add one more layer on the big picture that you're laying out here, Ian, which is that Larry Ellison and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and other tech billionaires also have access to unbelievable amounts of private data and public data. And they're also building AI machines, which are now, you know, whenever you Google something, you're 60% likely to see an AI summary at the top of that. And that AI summary isn't necessarily accurate. So we not only have them controlling the mainstream to traditional media and the social media, but also the back end of the tech stack that is supporting how AI is helping us interact with the information environments as well. So it's a really dangerous recipe where the very essence of how people understand what's truth versus falsity is under siege.
Well, but that was a deliberate strategy on the part of Putin's technologist, Zhukov, which Steve Bannon has borrowed over here. The notion of nothing is true and everything is possible. And in Bannon's case, it was flooding the end zone with bleep. That is the first thing that Putin did, was you just basically bamboozle people to the point where they lose interest in facts. And we can see how that has happened here in the United States. And the point that you just made, I think, is really the most relevant one of all, which is when you look at people like Larry Ellison, what are they all about? And Musk, they're all about data. That's what the Silicon Valley tech bros are all about. And I'm sure that is a part of Ellison's motive here, because he's making massive investments in AI. And these media assets are a way to get enormous amounts of data, aren't they?
There are enormous amounts of data and other intellectual property that unions have fought really hard to preserve. That's why you see The writers union, SAG-AFTRA, the producers and directors expressing great concern about this merger because they're already facing reduced bargaining power, and they understand that AI is going to come in and take their jobs. And if there is a more consolidated media market with only a couple of billionaire oligarchs owning anything, their bargaining power is reduced. There's going to be less opportunity for content producers. There's going to be less opportunity for actors and storytellers. You know, when Paramount was acquired by Skydance, there were 2,000 jobs lost in the entertainment industry. And that's not just rich actors. These are people who work in lighting, who do stand-in, who work in makeup. These are middle-class people who have good union jobs who are not going to get a paycheck anymore. And on the consumer end, it results in less choice, higher prices. And in the case of what we're going to see at CNN, we're going to see a less objective CNN newsroom, right? We've already seen David Ellison promise the president that they'll make sweeping changes to CNN if they're only given the chance. And we know what that means because we've seen what they've done already at CBS. It means firing journalists, killing important stories, and replacing the news with propaganda. You know, we woke up yesterday morning to news that we're at war, and we're running out of options for where to find credible information that holds this administration accountable to the truth.
And you mentioned, by the way, that the Ellisons have promised Trump that they'd fire people like Aaron Burnett and other anchors that Trump doesn't like. That's obviously what his focus is about. And as we mentioned, the tech bros, the billionaire tech bros who run Silicon Valley, they're interested in data and data mining and AI. And already, anecdotally, Jessica, I know, for example, a fashion photographer who's been put out of business by AI because his clients no longer need to pay models. They just get virtual models out of AI, and they can dress those models any way they like. So isn't that the beginning of how Hollywood is going to be changed by these tech bros into a kind of virtual reality? And on top of that, the future that Zuckerberg wants, he wants all of our children to be sitting with a helmet on looking at virtual reality. And, you know, it's almost like Aldous Huxley's drug Soma, this dystopian future where AI will take away all of our jobs. So we'll all be on a kind of digital dole that the tech bros will dispense, and then you'll be able to use these tokens to spend your day in a virtual reality controlled by them. This is not that far-fetched.
You know, I think when it comes to AI, what's been really disturbing to me is that these same people who had a plan to get us addicted to social media, because that is the business model, they're selling eyeballs to advertisers. Some of the very same players are the ones that are building out AI infrastructure, and they're now so rich, and they now have, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars that they're pouring into political PACs to shape this year's election, and to influence the folks running for office, that people are standing down. Even here in California, where I am, where we supposedly the liberal bastion of the country, we see some really weak government response to the harms of AI, the environmental crisis that it creates, the civil and human rights, the frankly, the just basic barriers it puts up to people accessing accurate news and information. And there's a real hesitancy to regulate this industry because of how bought off how many of our public elected officials are. And so I think we're in grave danger here, that our regulators are afraid to regulate, but their job is to protect the people. And the people still matter. And we've seen this time and again. When the people get in the streets, we can change the narrative. When people complained, you know, Free Press sent 10,000 calls to local ABC stations when Kimmel was pulled off the air. I don't think the companies were ready for that. And so we have to get off our devices. We have to get unaddicted to
Right.
what we're seeing. Like, and these machines are meant to dehumanize, but we have to rehumanize. We have to come together and oppose what's happening, the authoritarian takeover of our media system is not a foregone conclusion. Not if we stand up for what we believe in, not if we stand up against abuses of power that are happening in this administration and in these major media conglomerates. And we have a duty to do that. That's how we save our democracy.
Well, we've seen with Anthropic, which was the only AI company that even seemed to have a conscience. They didn't want to give away everything, have no guardrails in their contract with the Department of Defense, or the Department of War, as that idiot in charge of the DoD calls it. They've done AI war games and drills that the AI model opts to have a nuclear war in 95% of all the cases. Said, do you really want to hand over the future of the planet to AI machines? But, now, of course, Trump has now banned Anthropic on all government platforms in Trump's attempt to basically kill the company because it's doing the right thing. So
What's clear to me, Ian, is this administration isn't going to regulate in the public interest. And that's why in the case of this merger, in the case of AI regulation, in the case of much media policy, we have to rely on the states. And it's critically important in the context of this pending merger with Paramount, Skydance, and Warner Brothers that state AGs step up and investigate. It clearly violates antitrust law. We saw California State AG Rob Bonta say the other day that this is not a done deal. And we're at a critical moment. We are literally at a moment where we're going to find out if we have democracy or not, and if we have a media system that can withstand authoritarianism. And so there is a heavy burden on the states to step up right now.
So just in the last couple of minutes then, Jessica, do you think that in taking on the billionaire capture of our media, as citizens are beginning to do and starting to wake up to what's happened in Russia and what's happened in Hungary, and how Trump is following the model because the billionaires have got their guy in the White House, and they don't seem to care about America becoming a fascist country, with this ridiculous, destructive clown of a leader? The result, to my mind, is there has to be an investment, or at least an awareness of the value of independent media. And I'm not talking about programs, not necessarily touting this program, but public radio in general is one of the last bastions of accurate information. And is there a chance that people can recognize the threat of the consolidation of billionaire control over media, the mainstream media, give up on the mainstream media, and rediscover alternative media?
I think they're starting to, Ian. I mean, we've seen a huge renaissance around public media. We've seen huge concern after the federal government cut off funding to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I think we have work to do to develop what this new public media system can look like. But corporate media has clearly failed us. That much is for certain. Last year, Free Press published the Media Capitulation Index, which you can find on our website at freepress.net. We're in the process of updating that right now, and it ranked the top 35 media and tech companies based on how much they have capitulated to the Trump administration. And we found nearly across the board that these companies have failed to remain independent because they are more worried about the bottom line than they are about doing what's right. Meanwhile, public media, independent media, ethnic media are really holding the line. We're seeing that, with what's happened in Minnesota and here in Los Angeles and other places where ICE and National Guards have deployed, that small independent media outlets, sometimes affiliated with public broadcasting, sometimes small newsrooms like Calo or the Boyle Heights Beat, are breaking news and holding powerful people accountable and at great risk, frankly, because they don't have the infrastructure when they get sued or when they get attacked or when they get falsely accused by Kristi Noem of doing something that they didn't do. And so I really think it's time for us to double down on our investment in our information infrastructure and recognize that public media are the most independent and are really holding the line on democracy right now.
Well, Jessica Gonzalez, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Jessica Gonzalez, who is the co-CEO of Free Press and a public policy lawyer and activist at the intersection of racial justice, media, technology, and democracy. She was a staff attorney and teaching fellow at Georgetown Law's Institute for Public Representation, where she represented public interest and civil rights groups before the FCC and the courts of appeal, and she has testified before Congress on multiple occasions to support net neutrality. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
By 9:30, who'll ever know how much